A US military build-up and strikes on boats near Venezuela. President Donald Trump says he's targeting drugs gangs without presenting evidence. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says he'll stand up to Washington with his country now on high alert. So, what's next? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. So, US President Donald Trump has called a halt to diplomatic outreach with Venezuela, the latest move in escalating tensions between the two nations. Recent attacks on boats and a US naval build-up near Venezuela have put the country on high alert. Trump has called the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, a, quote, narco-terrorist. Maduro rejects this and says his country will fight any US military attack. There is a long history here with sanctions imposed from the days that Maduro's mentor and leftist leader, Hugo Chávez, was in power. They continued since Maduro's victory in two elections, which the US and Western allies say were rigged. Sanctions have had a devastating impact on Venezuela's economy and people, but Maduro, also accused of human rights abuses, has remained in power. So why have hostilities escalated quite so much in recent weeks? Is the US planning to oust Maduro? And how valid are Trump's claims of Venezuela's involvement in narcotics? We'll talk to our guests in a moment, but first this report from Alexandra Baez.
Venezuela's president appearing in front of the nation with a stark announcement: the discovery of a so-called false flag plan to bomb the U.S. embassy in Caracas, designed, he says, to place blame on the Venezuelan government. And he pointed the finger at Washington.
The terrorists who planned the failed attack on your embassy, which was planned for Sunday night or Monday as an incident to escalate violence, are in the United States of America, and you have their names, so do not play dumb.
Tensions between Washington and Caracas have been escalating since August. The U.S. has launched its largest deployment of American forces in the Caribbean in decades. Several warships, thousands of sailors, and a nuclear submarine off the coast of Venezuela. And it's bombed 4 boats in international waters, killing at least 21 people, accusing them of drug smuggling without presenting any evidence. There are big questions, both within and outside the U.S., about whether those attacks were legal under international law. The Trump administration says the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels, and the boats are legitimate targets, while Venezuela and others say these are extrajudicial killings. Some are also worried the U.S. buildup is part of a plan to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro.
Would you like to see regime change in Venezuela?
Well, we're not talking about that, but we are talking about the fact that you had an election which was a very strange election, to put it mildly. I'm being very nice when I say that. I can only say that billions of dollars of drugs are pouring into our country from Venezuela.
The U.S. accuses President Maduro of running a drug trafficking ring, which he denies. In 2019, Trump supported an attempted takeover by opposition leader Juan Guaido after an election many denounced as fraudulent, and applied heavy sanctions on Venezuela. The country has suffered economic pressure, but Maduro remains in power. Now he's deploying troops to the country's coastline and encouraging Venezuelans to enlist in civilian militias.
We are a sovereign and free country. If Donald Trump thinks he can come and bomb Venezuela, intimidate us, as he always does, he's wrong. Sometimes people laugh because our president, Nicolas Maduro, says we are prepared. We are prepared, but not for war. We want peace and showing that we want a dialogue. The door is always open.
We're just worried about what we're going to eat tomorrow. The dollar problem is hounding us every day. You charge us in dollars today, and tomorrow that money isn't enough. We're aware of the drug trafficking issue and the possible invasion, but honestly, I don't think that will happen.
Thousands marched for peace and for the U.S. to stay out in Caracas on Monday. Maduro says the U.S. action in recent weeks is the greatest threat the continent has faced in 100 years. Alexandra Baez, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's get straight into this with our guests. In Caracas, we have Elias Ferrer, founder of Orinoco Research, consulting company. In Washington, D.C., we welcome Paola Bautista de Aleman, politician and academic and member of the Venezuelan opposition in exile. And in Montevideo, Temir Porras, a managing director at Global Sovereign Advisory and also a former foreign policy advisor to President Hugo Chávez. A warm welcome to all of you. Before we get into what's behind all of this, let's tackle this US assertion that Venezuela is a narco state. Elias, I'll start with you in Caracas. You're right there in Venezuela. What do you hear there about the drugs trade? Is Maduro head of this so-called Cartel de las Solas, this narco syndicate? Is he flooding the US with drugs?
I think we need to start with some things that are true and then some things that are not true and are lies being made by the Trump administration. And I think it's very easy to get this whole issue confused because some things are true and some things aren't, right? So there's definitely drug trafficking going on in Venezuela. I mean, the country is neighboring Colombia, which is the main producer of cocaine. And you have this very long Caribbean coastline. So there's a lot of cocaine transiting through the country and then going into boats, into small airplanes, which then go to the Caribbean islands, Central America, and then on to Europe and the United States. That's definitely true. And there's a lot of members of the military that are involved in this drug trafficking, mostly by taxing transit and then allowing it to happen. So they are very much part of this whole problem. Now, what the Trump administration is saying, especially these claims by Attorney General Paola Bondi, is that Maduro is flooding the United States with cocaine, which and at that point, we're not talking about something that is true because there isn't this deliberate effort to throw drugs into the United States. It's already a very big market and is mostly being supplied through the Eastern Pacific and through Mexico. So Venezuela is really not the main entry point for cocaine.
Okay. And so what you're saying is that it is happening. It's not the main entry point. It is happening, though. But Maduro, you're saying, is not head of this so-called narco drug cartel.
We would be getting a wrong idea if we said that he's the head of a cartel.
Okay. So, Paola, let me come to you. So this Maduro narco narrative is just Trumpian rhetoric, an excuse to target Maduro.
Well, I would add at what Mr. Ferrer said, that in 2015, the nephews of Nicolas Maduro were captured in Haiti, dealing with drugs, with more than 800 kilos of drugs. So the relationship between high government in Venezuela and the cartels is quite proof right now. So I would add that information to the one that Mr. Ferrer did.
Okay, Temir, what's your view about this?
Well, there is clearly from the Trump administration a new push after having made one in the first Trump administration for a regime change in Venezuela. First, it was through the imposition of sanctions that failed. The very proof is that the Venezuelan government remains. And now, in this, I would say, second administration, there needs the administration, or at least part of the administration, I would claim the Department of State, led by Mr. Marco Rubio, need to find a valid claim to explain the aggressiveness, the toughness of the Trump administration vis-a-vis Venezuela. That can, have many internal problems, political problems, but very clearly to any international analyst does not pose a threat, a security threat to the United States. It is clearly a country, again, that has no ability to destabilize the United States. So this rhetoric about, which is a shaming rhetoric, of course, it seeks to find an excuse to justify a new push for regime change.
But the White House argues that the attacks are justified as a matter of self-defense because around 100,000 Americans die of overdoses every year.
Yeah, probably. But the fact of the matter is that the United Nations numbers show very clearly the routes of drug traffic into the United States. and none of them involved heavily Venezuela. Venezuela is a country that is subject, like any other, to drug trafficking. It's a country of transit, as it has been claimed, but by no means is even one of the main suppliers of drugs to the United States. And even if it were to be a country of transit, the link between the president of the country and the fact that there is drug trafficking in the country has never been established. So again, the claim of Venezuela being a narco country and then the top government officials being the sponsors of that trafficking is a rhetoric that very clearly is baseless.
So, Elias, given what you say, that the drugs are coming through Venezuela, it may not be the principal point of exit for drugs coming into the United States, but as you say, they're coming through. And now you have the US Department of Justice coming up with this legal opinion which says that President Trump, is allowed to authorize deadly force against a broad range of suspects due to an imminent threat to US citizens. So they would have it, the threat is there, and targeting the threat, attacking these boats and so forth, this build-up of naval forces, all legal.
Well, I mean, actually, I think we're getting things confused when we start listening to what the Trump administration is saying and accepting that whatever they say is going to be true and it's going to be fine what they say. Because essentially, they're comparing terrorists. So imagine someone doing like a mass shooting or putting a bomb inside the United States to someone carrying drugs. I mean, it is true that people die from drug overdoses and something should be done about drug trafficking. I mean, we could especially talk about demand reduction programs that are being underfunded right now under this administration. Right. So we're comparing these guys driving boats with people putting bombs inside the United States. And here there's a very important implication, and it's a really important precedent for the future, because what if we just say that anyone remotely involved with drug trafficking is basically a terrorist because they're complicit in what we are now saying that is terrorism? So, now the U.S. military is targeting Venezuelans, and many people don't seem to care. They're like, okay, fine, kill those terrorists. But what if they start attacking people in Mexico, inside the in the United States, using military force when it should be a law enforcement matter, right? So, and this is being done without due process. I mean, there are many human rights experts are saying it's extrajudicial executions.
All right, well, let's bring it to the nub of it all. Paolo, is Trump's narcotics crusade, a counter-narcotics crusade, if we could put it like that, really a cover, as Elias has proposed already, for deposing Maduro, and indeed as President Maduro himself would have it?
Well, I think that there are some things that have to be said at the moment, and it's that the relationship between Nicolas Maduro and his government and the Cartel of the Soles, it's been proved. I mean, as I said on my last intervention in 2015, 10 years ago, the nephews of Nicolas Maduro and Cilia Flores were kept in Haiti dealing drugs, 800 kilos of cocaine. So we cannot say that there is no relationship between the high government of Venezuela and narcotics. Now, regarding the position of the president of Trump administration on narcotics, that's their decision as a sovereign government to find the ways to fight this big problem that they have in their country. So I think, and there are other things that haven't said that we have to say. We had elections on the 28th of July last year, and Nicolas Maduro stole that election. We have more than 1,000 people in jail due to political reasons. We have massive violation on human rights. So in the 21st century, when you talk about narcotics and terrorism, you talk about the violation of human rights. So you have to see and analyze the big picture.
OK, I'm going to come on to the opposition and the election shortly, but just very briefly, if you would, Paolo, just answer that question. Is Trump really all about deposing President Maduro?
I think that it's an strategic, and it's an open strategic to promote democracy and to fight against narcotics, because the autocracies in the world right now are supported and related to organized crime and to narcotraffic. So you cannot split the analysis.
Temir, what do you think ultimately Trump wants to do here? Because we've got this huge buildup of US military assets off the coast of Venezuela, ships, submarines, F-35s in the air, 6,500 troops in the region too. Is this all about just saber-rattling gunboat diplomacy to try and encourage Maduro to come on board and to step down ultimately?
Well, certainly there is the intention of intimidating the government of Venezuela. As I mentioned, it's not a new effort coming from the Trump administration in Washington. Now, what is dangerous about the new situation is this massive mobilization of military personnel and equipment, which even in the United States raises questions about the real objective of this mobilization, because any expert would say that this is not how you tackle, for instance, the problems of drug trafficking. It is the U.S. Coast Guard which should be in charge. So definitely it's a very, very dangerous moment. Still, there must be, of course, a debate within the Trump administration about the actual, putting in motion of a war of aggression between the U.S. And Venezuela. Since, once again, according to international law, Venezuela doesn't pose any threat to the security of the United States. If it were a matter of drugs, it is well known that in Latin America, other countries like Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Bolivia have a heavy participation in the smuggling of drugs into the United States, and none of those countries have been accused or even threatened. So the focus on Venezuela is a strange one, and of course there is a risk. I don't believe that the decision is made. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that there is a strong push from the Florida political base of the Republican Party, in particular having influence on Mr. Marco Rubio, that they need to show exiles in Florida of Cuban descent or Venezuelan descent that they're being tough on the government of Venezuela, and that this threat exists. But of course, I don't believe President Trump has made a final decision on this, and I hope that reason will prevail and no war of aggression will be launched on Venezuela.
The focus on Venezuela is strange, as Temir has alluded to, isn't it? Because there have been negotiations up until very recently when Trump told his envoy Richard Grenell to pull out, to stop all outreach with Caracas. Is that all part of adding to the pressure on Maduro?
Well, we have had a lot of negotiations with the opposition, with the dictatorship, and the U.S. and the dictatorship. The last one was signed in Barbados on October of 2023, and the dictatorship didn't honor the agreement that they made. They promised that they were going to give the opposition electoral conditions for the presidential elections that we made on the 28th of July, and they didn't honor any of the agreement. So that's a very, very bad thing, because if you cannot trust the people where you are working with and trying to make an agreement, now you have to take different ways to solve the problems. And I will add to what Mr. Porras said about Mexico and other countries in the region that have drug issues, is that the difference is that in Venezuela is proof that the main person who is with this kind of business are in the government. It's the president, it's the vice president, if the first lady, it's the family who is in charge. So that's a very, very important difference between the case of Mexico or Colombia or even El Salvador.
Of course, they deny that. Elias, should the United States engage in forcefully removing Maduro from power? And as we've already established, there's no certainty that is going to happen. But should the United States proceed to do so, what do you think the implications of that would be?
Right. So I think we could start with what that could look like. And given the capacity that has been deployed in the Caribbean, which is a lot of firepower for very few ground troops, I think there's only about 2,000 Marines. We'd be looking at something like what they call like kinetic strikes, so probably like a drone strike, missile strike on some parts of Venezuela, maybe even using special operations. And I think that, we're looking at something that can be essentially very destabilizing for Venezuela. And what that means is that let's say they attack top regime officials, top generals, but what happens the day after? And I think that's something that's probably not being considered. And I would hope that in the Trump administration, they're thinking about that, right? Like what happens when we've killed or captured this general or someone high up in the regime? Because essentially you have a lot of irregular groups inside of Venezuela. You do have Colombian guerrillas, not necessarily these Bolivarian militias that we've seen on some of these videos, but you do have, let's say, like Chavista or like regime-aligned.
Right, and when you say irregular groups, we are talking about armed groups, aren't we? Including government-linked paramilitaries, exactly, and criminal organizations, and even Colombian rebels.
Exactly, and some of them are aligned with the government, some of them aren't. And essentially, it's not that they're going to come out and defend Maduro, but it is that you're going to have a situation where it's very difficult to govern the country. And I think many experts have been saying that if there was this some kind of intervention, essentially what would guarantee that someone like Edmundo González, who's the opposition candidate who won in July but is now in exile, so for him to be able to govern the entire country, he would need the U.S. Army to be present in the country, occupying the country. And actually, and I don't think that the Trump administration or anyone in the United States is thinking that that is a good idea.
No, exactly. So, Temir, what's your view of that and the potential for the United States risking entangling itself into a wider war, a protracted war?
I think it would be a disaster, first and foremost, of course, for the Venezuelan people, for us Venezuelans, who would be the victims of the military aggression from the strongest military power in the world. And this would be, I would think, after Venezuela suffering for now almost a decade, the imposition of financial and economic sanctions from the United States, a war of aggression would only make things worse. But of course, if we look into what the U.S. politics are these days, the promise of President Trump from refraining from opening endless wars, which is one of the promises he was elected on, would be in complete contradiction with what this, I hope, scenario of a war with Venezuela. Anyone in the United States, if you ask anyone in the public opinion of the United States, in any of the cities of the United States, would have a very hard time to even know where Venezuela is located, what is it doing to harm the United States, and even more, of course, to justify why you would have to send troops into Venezuela to first harm the Venezuelan people and then risk the lives of U.S. citizens.
Paola, you're in opposition in exile. If Maduro is ousted, who takes over?
Well, I think that the main disaster of our people and of our country, it's been the dictatorship. We have more than 8 million of Venezuelan people that have been expelled from Venezuela. We have a minimum wage that is less than $4 a month. We have a lot of poverty, huge inequality, massive violation of human rights. So if we want to talk about tragedy, we have to talk about the dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro. And Venezuela has a very, very excellent democratic tradition. In 1958, when Latin America was full of military dictatorship, we had a very successful democratic transition to democracy that lasted 4 years. And also, we have the will and we have the mechanism to go back to democracy. This narrative about armed groups from Colombia and the images that you have shown on the screen on this TV program, they don't show what is happening in our country. 70% of Venezuelan people, this is the last survey that has been published from a British company, says that want political change and they are willing to work for democracy. So we don't have to be afraid of freedom.
Okay, Paola, thank you for that. Elias, it's true to say, isn't it, that the idea of a US intervention would be music to the ears of many, many people in Venezuela, especially, of course, Maduro's political foes, because Venezuela's economy and democracy are in pieces.
Yeah, so I think there's absolutely no question that the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans inside the country and all over the world, because there's a really big diaspora, the overwhelming majority want change and they want it quickly, right? I mean, especially if you live here and if you're living in poverty, if you've yourself been a victim of political persecution or your family or your friends have been. So, yeah, you want change already. And I think, the idea of U.S. military intervention is like music to their ears for some of these people, especially if they think that it's going to be a quick and easy thing. If they've seen it in many movies, for example, of like, oh, they come in, they kill the bad guys, and that's it. The problem is that usually when the U.S. does military interventions, we see really big disasters. I mean, if we look all over the world, in most cases, I mean, at least when you have a bigger country, what you end up having
I'm just going to pull out of there for a second, if I can, because I just want to wrap it up with Temir. Forgive me, Elias, but we're just coming to the end of the programme. What's your thought on that? Because Maduro leaving would be a popular event amongst many Venezuelans.
Probably, but I'm still to find the bomb that distinguishes between a supporter and an opponent of a government. Therefore, this idea that a foreign intervention and a war of aggression is a good way to foster political change, and that a war would preserve some Venezuelans while harming others is absolutely baseless. Once again, we can see it today. A genocide is being performed in Gaza, and the justification is that it is targeted towards a specific group. And nonetheless, the victims in the overwhelming majority are the civilian population. So once again, there are many examples historically that show that any armed intervention provoked for political reasons leads to further disaster and to destabilization of a country. And nobody would be able to imagine which scenario would follow a military intervention, not even the United States. So again, the problems of the Venezuelan polity or the Venezuelan economy are for the Venezuelans to solve with the help of the international community, but no armed conflict should be justified, no matter the troubles of the Venezuelan society.
All right, we'll be following events very, very closely, but that's all we've got time for. Thanks to all our guests, to Elias Ferrer, Paola Bautista de Aleman and Temir Porras. Thank you very much. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, just go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the entire team here in Doha, it's goodbye for now.